10th, 1996, the South Summit, Mount Everest, 28,700 feet. Rob Hall hasn't moved in 6 hours. His oxygen is nearly gone. The storm has been running at 70 miles per hour for hours. Somewhere below him, in the darkness and the blinding snow, 8 people are already dead or dying. His clients, his colleagues, his friends. He has a satellite phone pressed against his frozen face. On the other end, thousands of miles away in New Zealand, his pregnant wife is listening. This is what happened on the deadliest night in Everest's recorded history. By 1996, Everest had become something it was never designed to be: a product. In the late 1980s, Nepal began issuing commercial climbing permits to expedition companies willing to guide paying clients to the summit. The logic was straightforward: wealthy amateurs, professional guides, fixed ropes, supplemental oxygen. The mountain's difficulty could be managed. The fees were significant. A single permit cost $70,000. A guided spot on a commercial expedition ran between $60,000 and $65,000 per climber. By the mid-1990s, 2 companies dominated the upper mountain every spring season: Adventure Consultants, run by Rob Hall; Mountain Madness, run by Scott Fisher. Hall was 35 years old and had guided 39 clients to the summit without losing a single one. He was methodical, safety-obsessed, and had summited Everest 5 times himself. In mountaineering circles, his safety record was considered borderline impossible given the conditions he routinely operated in. Fisher was different: loud where Hall was quiet, instinct-driven where Hall was systematic. He had soloed Everest without supplemental oxygen in 1994, one of roughly 200 people ever to do so. His clients described him as magnetic. Other guides described him as the kind of climber who made the mountain look easier than it was. In the spring of 1996, both teams were on the mountain simultaneously. On the morning of May 10th, they pushed for the summit together. The summit attempt began just after midnight. Hall had 8 clients on his rope. Fisher had 8 of his own. Support guides, including Russian alpinist Anatoly Bukriv, considered by many the strongest high-altitude climber alive, moved between the teams. Among Hall's clients were Beck Weathers, a Dallas pathologist on his 4th Himalayan expedition, and Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Washington State who had turned back just below the summit the previous year and had returned to finish it. Among the journalists embedded with the expedition was John Krakauer, on assignment for Outside magazine. The headlamps stretched up the Lhotse face in a single thread of light. Conditions looked manageable. The forecast was acceptable. Then the first problem arrived. Near the balcony at 27,600 feet, the fixed ropes ran out. The Sherpas assigned to push ropes to the Hillary Step had fallen behind schedule. The entire column stopped moving and waited. At nearly 28,000 feet, in sub-zero temperatures, burning through oxygen with every minute of stillness. By the time the column reached the Hillary Step, it was already past 11 a.m. Hall's standing turnaround rule was 2 p.m. Summit or not, every client turned around at 2 p.m. It was the rule that had kept 39 people alive. The first climbers reached the summit at 1:07 p.m. Others were still an hour below it. Doug Hansen summited at approximately 4 p.m., 2 hours past the deadline. Hall had waited for him, descended back from the summit to help his client up the final section, watching the clock and the sky simultaneously. The sky had already changed. A storm system that forecasters had not predicted was accelerating from the southwest. By the time Hall and Hansen turned to descend from the summit ridge, winds had reached 70 miles per hour and visibility had collapsed to near zero. The rope disappeared. The route disappeared. Everything above 27,000 feet became the same featureless white wall. Scott Fisher, who had been moving slowly all day, later analysis suggested he had been fighting a pulmonary condition for days before the summit push, collapsed near the balcony during descent. His Sherpa guide, Lopsang Jangbu, who had been physically towing Fisher up the mountain for hours, was too exhausted to carry him further. Fisher was left with a sleeping bag and oxygen. He never regained consciousness. At Camp 4, Anatoly Bukriv made a decision that would define his legacy and divide the climbing world for decades. He descended to camp ahead of his clients, moving fast without supplemental oxygen, banking on his ability to recover quickly and go back out into the storm to find them. Critics later argued he abandoned his clients. Defenders argued he executed the only rescue strategy that worked. He went back into the storm 3 times. He pulled 3 people out alive. Beck Weathers was not among them. Weathers had been left on the South Col after 2 separate guided groups assessed him, found no signs of life, and continued. His core temperature had dropped to a level physicians later said was incompatible with survival. His face was completely black. His right hand was frozen solid to the wrist. He had been lying in the snow for approximately 18 hours. Then he opened his eyes. Nobody has ever fully explained why Beck Weathers regained consciousness. He described it afterward as a vision of his family in Texas that pulled him back. Physiologists have suggested the combination of a slight temperature rise as the storm passed and an extraordinary stress response. Whatever the mechanism, Weathers stood up alone, oriented himself toward the lights of Camp 4, and walked. Nearly blind, both hands were destroyed. He walked back. Rob Hall was still on the south summit. His radio calls to base camp through the night gave the clearest account of what was happening above the storm. Doug Hansen had died somewhere near the summit. Andy Harris, one of Hall's lead guides, had disappeared into the storm while attempting to bring oxygen up to Hall and Hansen. His body was never found. Hall was alone at 28,700 feet with 1 working oxygen bottle and a failing radio. Base camp patched through a satellite phone call to Hall's wife, Jan Arnold, in Christchurch, New Zealand. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child. The call lasted several minutes. Hall's voice was calm. He told her not to worry about the rescue attempts. He told her the climbing had been beautiful. He asked her to name their daughter Sarah after a mountain guide they both admired. "Don't worry too much," he said. Shortly after the call ended, radio contact stopped. Rob Hall died on the south summit of Everest on the morning of May 11th. His body remained on the mountain. It is still there. When the storm cleared on May 11th and rescuers reached the high camps, the full count became clear. 8 people died. Rob Hall, Doug Hansen, Andy Harris, Scott Fisher, Yasuko Namba, Tsewang Smanla, Dorje Morup, Tsewang Paljor. John Krakauer's account, published in Outside and then expanded into the book Into Thin Air, reached millions of readers within a year. It triggered a debate about commercial mountaineering that has never fully resolved, whether Everest had been sold to people who had no business being there, and whether the guides who sold it to them had knowingly taken money for a promise the mountain could revoke at any moment. Anatoly Bukriv died in an avalanche on Annapurna the following year. Beck Weathers lost his right hand to the wrist, the fingers of his left hand, his nose, and parts of both cheeks to frostbite. He returned to his surgical practice in Dallas. He still talks about the vision of his family that woke him up in the snow. He has never been able to explain it any other way.